In the span of 4 days, over 800 people have given more than $56,000 to an online site raising funds for an Upper Leacock Township, Pennsylvania farmer who, for the second time in just 2 years, has seen state officials enter his property and foist on him legal burdens that will cost him earnings and time, put his business in jeopardy, and burden his willing customers. What's going on in America? Well, we'll dig into this terrible example of government usurpation of our freedom coming up. Hi folks, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. You know, this is an unfolding news story that might remind observers of the goodwill people often show, even as it reminds people about the numerous portions of the Bill of Rights many government employees appear willing to breach. Amish farmer Amos Miller, Thursday, January 4th, had to deal with Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture agents entering his property with a warrant to investigate his private buying club. It's the second time he's had trouble with the state, and it comes after the previous dispute supposedly was resolved. Lancaster Online reported January 5th, quote, Miller came to the attention of federal authorities in 2016 when the Food and Drug Administration said it identified listeria in samples of Miller's raw milk and found it to be genetically similar to the bacteria in 2 people who developed listeriosis, one of whom died after consuming raw milk. But despite the FDA's insinuation that Mr. Miller's products were to blame for the tragedy, the claim of genetic similarity applies to all forms of listeria. More pertinent and perhaps more valuable to the rest of the nation is the fact that the FDA is not sanctioned by the U.S. Constitution, and the state inspection and federal inspection paradigms aren't consistent with the constitutionally proper jurisprudential method that handles such potential poisoning claim problems. The correct method is found in the personal issuance of a wrongful death or liability suit based on common law torts. As scholars on tort law have noted, tortious claims only can be made by real people, not by abstractions called states or governments. States aren't individual people and they have no rights. Nonetheless, writes Lancaster Online, quote, that led to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food Safety and Inspection Service investigating and suing Miller over the meat and poultry issues in 2019, which led to the first agreement under which Miller was to follow federal food safety rules. And this led to more conflict. For much of 2022, Miller and the U.S. government were in a standoff over his compliance with federal food safety rules and failure to pay assessed fines. At one point, Miller refused to follow through on previous agreements reached under a federal judge's supervision. But the parties resolved the dispute in early 2023, and the federal court docket for Miller's case shows it was closed in August. Now, given the New York and Michigan-based claims of food poisoning allegedly tied to Mr. Miller's farm, many Americans might mistakenly think that these federal and state moves are appropriate. Well, they're not, and a few questions remain quite outstanding. For example, how did the unconstitutional FDA and USDA impose fines on Mr. Miller if they never accused him of a crime against someone, if they never afforded him due process under the 5th and 14th Amendments, if they engaged in punishing him with said fines contrary to the 8th Amendment? After all, fines are only supposed to be levied after due process. So, yeah, breach of the 8th Amendment. Lancaster Online blithely accepted the notion that the state or federal governments can simply make something illegal to sell without ever really citing the U.S. Constitution or actually conforming to more fundamental human ethics and due process. They could just do it. The paper noted that the state warrant issued January 3rd allowed the state to search for, among other things, illegal raw milk and raw milk products, including eggnog. What exactly are illegal raw milk and milk products? Either people claim harm and then approach government to facilitate their claims, or the owner of the farm should be able to go about his business unmolested, and people are free to buy his products or turn away. The Lancaster Patriot notes that this search warrant was issued by Magisterial District Judge B. Denise Cummins and included an affidavit of probable cause completed by Sherry Morris, Acting Bureau Director of Food Safety with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. Probable cause claimed by a bureau director? Again, that doesn't conform with what's required by the Fourth Amendment. In fact, the affidavit cited what the bureaucrat claimed were breaches of demands by the state, not criminal harms inflicted on others by the farmer. Evidently, Mr. Miller should be unable to offer products to willing customers if he hasn't asked for permission and been licensed and registered by the so-called authorities. Quote, in the affidavit, Morris, that's the food safety person from the state, contends that Miller has not filed for applications from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture for registration, licensing, or permitting under the pertinent Retail Food Facility Safety Act, Food Safety Act, and milk sanitation laws. As Miller's attorney, Robert Barnes, observes, quote, today the Department of Agriculture and the state of Pennsylvania suddenly came without notice, raided Amos's farm, and detained everything Amos had in the farm's freezer. They did so in a lawless manner, without appropriate authority, in violation of their own rules and regulations, despite never objecting to the prior resolutions reached with the federal government, and despite a complete failure by the state to even reach out to Amos's own counsel, Robert Barnes. The state's own rules require advance notice, reasonable timeframes for inspections, and a showing of credentials, none of which occurred here. Yes, indeed. How shocking. The people who write the rules flout their own rules. Maybe they shouldn't be writing the rules about our lives. You know, Congressman Thomas Massie, the Republican of Kentucky, has introduced legislation to reduce the pressures these officious so-called officials and federal bureaucrats place on buyers and sellers of agricultural and dairy products. And Massie, too, has tried to call attention to the Miller plight. For his sake, Miller has cited his religious beliefs as part of his justified claim to be left alone by the regulators. But he shouldn't have to cite religion to do that. The federal usurpations of how we do business are unwarranted on any moral level, and they're illegal and unconstitutional as well. It's up to us to help others understand that. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please like and subscribe. And make sure, if you're headed over to YouTube, that you double check that you are subscribed. At Rumble, they don't censor us, so please visit our video page over at Rumble and follow us there. You can also find us anytime at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. Find out what the whole team is doing, and while you're there, go to the MRC Store, and please consider contributing to the Media Research Center to help create videos like these. You can also find us inside Facebook, on TikTok, and on Instagram, and on X, Twitter, and on Gab. You can find me as @GardnerGoldsmith, and on Twitter/X, I'm @Gard, G-A-R-D, Goldsmith. For MRC TV, thanks again for watching. I'm Gardner Goldsmith.